Hi everyone. I'm a fairly new podcaster. I have been podcasting for a few months now, but I have received compliments from people who have listened to my podcast, and for that I am very grateful. Whenever you receive good comments, they work as a great source of encouragement. People have asked me, how do you start a podcast? And so I wanted to share with you all some basic information on how to start podcasting. Before I go further, I do want to mention one thing. If you, after listening to this, decide to start your own podcast, please share a link to your podcast with me. Send me a message or a comment so that I can listen to your podcast. If I'm able to inspire you to start your own podcast, I would like to know that. So please share with me a link to your podcast by connecting with me. So now going back to my podcast. The name of my podcast, which I started a few months ago, is called Explore and Engage with Anam. When I decided to start podcasting, I had no idea where to start. I did not know what equipment to get, what platform to use, how to find a good name for my podcast, what would I be podcasting about, etc. All I knew was that I wanted to speak, I wanted to express, I wanted to communicate my thoughts. I did not know who would listen to me. I do have friends and well-wishers and people I have met through my journey in life. But would they be interested to listen to my podcast? I did not know. I do a lot of public speaking in general and receive excellent response. And so I was confident that I would get an audience. But how big of an audience that would be, or whether or not this method of communication would be given a warm welcome, I did not know. But I felt a strong urge to start podcasting for myself, if nothing else. So I started a search on the internet. Of course, I would need a laptop, and I have that. But what microphone I need? Do I need a headset? Do I need to soundproof my room? What software I would use to manage the sound file? These were all questions that I had. Now, if you do any search on the internet on any topic, you will get tons of answers. And that may actually make you more confused than provide you with a solid direction. For example, if you ask a question on the internet, on an internet thread, what microphone should I buy for my podcast? You will get dozens and dozens of answers. Someone will recommend cheap microphones, others will recommend ones that cost hundreds of dollars, if not more. Some will suggest a condenser microphone, others will suggest dynamic microphone, and so much more. But that's where you have to make a choice. Study and learn and then use your instincts. Go with what you believe is best for you. If you personally know someone who you trust and who you believe has the experience with these sorts of matters, you can take his or her advice. But at the end of the day, you make the decision. For me, I realized that if I keep researching, I would never be able to start podcasting. I would go on figuring out and plan on how to start a podcast forever. So I simply went to Best Buy and told one of the associates that, hey, I'm starting a podcast. I need a not so expensive microphone that I can use. She showed me a couple of options and suggested the Snowball Ice, the microphone. It's just $50 roughly. That was the beginning of my journey. I just had purchased a microphone. Now, if you talk to podcasters, they will tell you that the Snowball Ice is probably one of the most basic microphones. It is nothing fancy, but works great if you're starting a podcast. You can always get microphones that are several $100s, and they will give you a much better quality. But perhaps for starting a podcast, the initial stages, you should start with a basic microphone. Now, you can always upgrade after a few episodes. Now, where you podcast from is very important. It could be a studio, a real professional studio, or it could be your kitchen counter, or your drawing room, or your bedroom. For me, I do it from my work desk in my bedroom. It is, of course, not padded for soundproofing, but it is quiet enough. I can close the windows and the door, and I get a pretty quiet room. Some people use fancy headsets. I do not. I keep it very simple. Sometimes the more stuff you add, the bigger a task it becomes to podcast. The focus, I believe, at least in the initial stages, should be on content, and that's what I do. Once again, you should always, in my humble opinion, do a few episodes and see how things are working. If you like podcasting and you're getting good reception from your audience, then decide how you want to upgrade. On your computer, you will most certainly need a software to manage the audio files. For me, it is Audacity. I use the software called Audacity to record the sound and manage the sound files. Audacity also has tons and tons of tools that would allow you to do a large number of things to improve the sound quality by adding music or merging audio files, removing background noise in case there's any, and so much more. There are lots of options, and I actually don't know most of them. For me, it takes a few minutes only to make sure that my audio is sounding okay and that there are no unwanted room noise or external sounds in the audio file. Audacity also allows you to save your file in formats that are appropriate for podcasting. One of the most important decisions you're going to make is to choose the platform for your podcast, the hosting platform. There are platforms that are free and others that you have to pay for. There are many platforms such as Anchor, Buzzsprout, Podbean, Simplecast, and many more. I'll let you research those on the internet and learn more. There are many bloggers who write detailed reviews on the podcast hosting platforms. Whatever platform you choose, it is important to find out how and where your episodes are being distributed. Trying to find out if your podcast will be available on places like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, etc. The goal is to get exposure so that you can reach new audiences. Once you make your podcast public, or each episode as you move forward, the platform would have the episodes available for people to come and click and listen to these. Also, the platform, depending on which one you pick, would distribute the podcast for you and would distribute each episode as you publish those. Depending on the platform you pick, you can also receive various data on the number of downloads, how many countries your listeners are in, and much more. Also, different platforms have different features. Pricing, monthly capacity limits, extra features that they offer to improve the sound quality of your episodes, and much more. So if you're interested in starting a podcast, make sure you learn about the hosting companies and see what's best for you. Okay, now let's talk about the actual podcast. First of all, ask yourself, why do you want to start a podcast? Do you want to start a podcast as a hobby? Or do you want to make money from your podcast? Do you want to do it once or twice a week, or just once a month, or as and when you feel like doing? Try to understand how serious you are about podcasting. Is there a specific topic that you want to focus your podcast on? For example, movie reviews, or real estate, or politics, For example, if you are a doctor, you can talk about healthcare, perhaps a different healthcare topic in each episode. It is always best to have a focus, maybe not too narrow of a focus, but some kind of a focus, than to simply have a podcast where you talk about a million different things. Of course, you can also do that. It's really up to you. Well, I must confess that I actually have a wide range of topics on my podcast, although they are somewhat related to politics or public policy, but even then, there is variety, which some people like and others don't. For example, this particular episode, I'm talking about podcasting itself. And that's not related to other episodes on my podcast where I talk about social and political issues. Perhaps that's why I named my podcast Explore and Engage with Anam. The word explore says it all. I explore issues and topics, and whatever comes to my mind, I do a podcast episode on. Is that a great strategy to build audience? Well, I don't know, only time will tell. As I said earlier, I am focused on expressing my thoughts and communicating with people. My podcast is a way for me to document my thoughts, and so I often jump from one topic to something very different as I'm creating content for my episodes. Consistency is important in podcasting. If you develop an audience, it is best to have a schedule. For example, release a new episode every Tuesday or every Monday and Thursday, something like that. Having a schedule would send a message to your audience that you are serious about podcasting, and then people will be more inclined to listen to your podcast. Also, a lot of people ask questions about what is the ideal length of time for each episode. There is no ideal length of time. You can have a 20-minute episode or an hour-long episode, you decide. However, once again, I think it is nice to have some consistency so that you are not having a half-hour episode and then the next episode is 2 hours long and then the third episode is only 15 minutes long. If you do that, the audience gets confused. The audience would not appreciate such big differences. Once again, try to have some consistency. The final topic that I will touch on today is whether or not you should have guests on your podcast. So far, I have not had any guest. So far, I have just over 24 episodes and I have done all the episodes by myself. However, it is nice to have guests, particularly if your episodes focus on specific topics. For example, if you want to talk about COVID-19 in an episode, it might be good to bring in a guest who is an infectious disease expert. Or if you want to talk about sports, perhaps you can bring a guest who is an athlete or a former athlete who can add value to the discussion. But having guests is not mandatory in any way. I podcast alone, but there are other podcasts where 2 or more people are hosting the podcast and they talk among themselves. So if you're podcasting with a partner, that's 2 people right there without any guest. Once again, you get to decide what you are most comfortable with. Podcasting is fun. It requires some research up front to help you get started, but once you start, it gets better with each episode. The most important thing is the content. What you discuss. Why people would want to listen to you. Time is a precious resource. And if you want listeners for your podcast, you have to make sure you're offering some good content that would make people spend their valuable time listening to what you have to say. So with that, I hope I have been able to provide some useful information. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. This is not intended to be a complete manual on how you can start your podcast and how you can grow it. There are many aspects of podcasting, such as advertising. I can't possibly discuss all of that in one episode, maybe later. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate your support for my podcast, Explore and Engage with Anam. I would love your comments, so please connect with me. I hope to be back again soon with a new episode.